Similar to what happened today. The author, a businessman who escaped from Iran in 1979, 1 month before the Ayatollah Khomeini took over. On the phone now from Japan, Michael Kahn, that book's author. Michael, first of all, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Let's talk a little bit about the book's similarities. Screaming Eagles focuses on a really well-coordinated attack by terrorists. The difference, they're not crashing planes into buildings. They're actually crashing planes into other planes. But what else is similar about the book and what happened today?
Well, what the similarity really is that basically war's been declared on the United States. And the way to do that is if you can make the terrorist attack so horrific, which is exactly what happened last night when I was watching television, then what you do is you energize 270 million people. And the way they did that is exactly the way I set out, I believed it would be done in my book. What I did was I chose a specific time. I took 2:30 in the afternoon, and I had the planes crashing into jumbo jets at 2:30 so that you were actually making a statement. What they did, if you look at the timing that they had here, within 1 hour, 4 planes crashed into someplace or other. So that is where there's a similarity.
Michael, what led you to believe that this would happen?
Well, the position is this. I escaped out of Iran, and what I've noticed is since then, this was in the 79, 2 weeks before the Shah abdicated. What I've noticed since then is that when Khomeini came into power, the whole dynamic of Islam changed. Before, what you had the Muslim countries, you had Muslim countries that were upset with a small country called Israel. And that was it. It had been going on for hundreds of years. All of a sudden, you got Islam expanding. And today you have probably, instead of at that time there were 30 countries, today you probably have 60 or 70 countries that are now Islamic. And the way that it works is that if you read Reuters, you'll see that 2 days ago I read in the newspaper here that there's a little town in Nigeria called Jos. There are 4 million people that live there. It's a Christian community. The Muslims came in and started killing people and saying, we want this to become now a Muslim community. So now you have Nigeria with 150 million people, all of a sudden are now going to become Islamic. And these are the sort of situations that you're having. So what has happened here is that the fact that you're talking about the Palestinians and the Israelis, that's just a side issue. War has been declared on the United States. But my biggest similarity to the book is that the government of the United States in my book retaliates against the wrong perpetrator.
And you think that's what's going to happen here?
I believe that Osama bin Laden is a man who's a Saudi multi-millionaire. In order to coordinate high-tech attacks to go and retaliate against Afghanistan, they're a bankrupt state. They can hardly read. They're illiterate. So you're going to take out Afghanistan. You might take out bin Laden. But there's a brains behind bin Laden. There's money behind Hamas, Islamic Jihad, all of these terrorist groups. Somebody is supplying them with money. Somebody is supplying them with teaching how to kill people. And to take out bin Laden, all you're going to do is just make him a martyr, and there'll be bin Laden number 2.
Which could make things very worse. Michael, I apologize. I'm going to have to cut you a little short there. We are running heavy on time. But again, I know you are in Japan, and with the air situation here, may not be able to get home very soon. But I do appreciate you joining us.
That's my problem. I don't know if I can leave this afternoon. But the fact is this over here, that I think that you've got to be very careful. If you want to take out Osama bin Laden, you've got to find out who the people are behind that. And the people that are behind that, as I see it, are probably going to be either Saudi Arabia, because they've got billions of dollars that they get from oil, Iran or Iraq. Those are the people. If you can cut that head off, the rest of terrorism will fall away.
Michael, again, we appreciate you joining us for the interview, and much more investigation needs to be done. Thank you very much for taking your time with us. Coming up in this special edition of 13 News at 6, Heather will sit down with a local Red Cross volunteer as she gets ready to give whatever she can to the victims of this terrible tragedy. Don't go away.
Welcome to Inside Asia. I'm Veronica Pedroza in Hong Kong. Again this week, we present a special edition of the program focusing on the international fight against terrorism. For the next 20 minutes, we'll be looking at the campaign and its effects from an Asian perspective.
Global war against terrorism closely to determine just what shape the final security plan will take. Sun Jie, CNN, Seoul.
The events in the United States since September 11 seem to many to be the stuff of fiction. And indeed, several novels apparently foretold the real-life narrative of terrorists hijacking planes to plow them into American targets. One such book, Screaming Eagles, was written by Michael Kahn, who wrote the violent and provocative action story based on his own experiences in the Middle East. He told me that he believed terrorists might train their sights on Asia.
I have a look and I see over here that you have security in your airports. But you have so many planes flying from so many of these countries which have got Islamist extremists, and nobody is checking the security in those countries.
Security officials, though, around Asia are hearing the message, or the security message, as it were, from the events of September 11th. But before September 11th, this kind of attack did seem to exist only in the realms of fiction. Is that why you wrote in fiction?
Yes, because what I felt was this. I felt that the United States was in a situation that it felt that every war that it had been part of was away from its shores. And what I felt, and this is why I wrote, that groups of terrorists could come into the United States very easily. It's an easy country to come into.
So an event like September 11th no longer exists in the realms of fiction. It has become reality.
What we have now is there's a new world war. The world wars we had previously, the first and the second, they lasted 5 years each. The ideological world war, which was communism against the West, that lasted 60 years. Now, unless we do something now, we have an ideological war. You have war has been declared by Islam on various nations. And if one of the nations happens to be China, or it happens to be Japan, or it happens to be somewhere out here, who in actual fact is looking into how to protect that particular country?
But it isn't exactly Islam, is it? It's the Taliban and it's Osama bin Laden.
No, I don't agree with you. Osama bin Laden is a man with $300 million. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett have $300 billion, not $1 million. You cannot run an international terrorist organization the way he has for the last 10 years with these cells unless he has a state that is sponsoring him. You have 4 potential states that have the money that can do it. There's no one in Africa, no one in South America. You've only got 4. One of them is Saudi Arabia, one of them is Iraq, the other one is Iran, the other one is Libya. I've lived in Iran. I was there when the Shah was overthrown by the ideology of Khomeini. So I understand what it's like to be in a country where ideology takes over, and then it doesn't matter about military might. It doesn't matter if you've got planes out here. What matters is if the people with ideology decide that they're going to overthrow your government, there's very little you can do.
Terrorism is now an everyday part of the English language. As such, many people are trying to learn more about what terrorism actually means. Air Force Sergeant Mike Tadaishi introduces us to a man who believes he can help people understand.
Michael Kahn has appeared on numerous TV shows, including CNN. He's also written a book which seems to forecast the events of September 11th. Mr. Kahn is now an American citizen, but before becoming an American, he served in the Israeli military as an ambulance driver fighting the PLO. Mr. Khan is now a businessman, author, and now a man with a message. He spoke to public affairs officers from across the Republic of Korea, explaining why he feels as an American he should help fight terrorism.
Because if you don't make changes, we are going to have terrorist attack after terrorist attack after terrorist attack. I think that that's more important than me coming here on business and doing business.
Mr. Khan admits he's not politically correct, saying there should be no Mr. Nice Guy on the war on terrorism. As an Israeli, he's viewed as having a bias. But he doesn't think so.
But if Israel disappears today, tonight there's an earthquake, and Israel disappears today, can you honestly tell me that tomorrow the terrorists are going to stop attacking the United States?
Mr. Khan plans to travel to as many places as possible to deliver his message. He hopes to make a follow-up visit to Korea early next year. Reporting from Yongsan, I'm Air Force Sergeant Mike Tadaishi, AFN News.
Welcome back. He was first a guest on 13 Cares a year ago when his suspense novel, The Screaming Eagles, came to prominence for its amazing parallels to the September 11th attacks, including the terrorist use of hijacked aircrafts as weapons. In the month since, Mr. Michael Kahn, who is personally familiar with Middle East tensions and the Muslim fundamentalist movement, has been interviewed numerous times about his thoughts and impressions on the war on terrorism. And I'm pleased to be given that opportunity to do the same today. Michael, good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Thanks for being here. First of all, you brought something along, a picture. And we're going to use this as our leaping off point today.
Fine.
We talk about the fact that the United States war on terrorism, depending on whom you're listening to, is gaining some momentum. But one thing they'll never gain momentum on is the abject hatred that a lot of people in the Middle East, Arab countries in particular, have for the United States. And you brought along an example. A couple of lighters. These are actual cigarette lighters that are being sold in the Middle East. Tell us what we're looking at.
Well, what you're looking at there are two lighters. There's one lighter which is the New York Towers, and you'll see that there's a plane going in on the right-hand side. When you click that down, that's when the flame goes up. The second one is an Al-Qaeda terrorist.
That's in the lower left-hand
corner. The lower
corner.
left-hand corner, and you'll see over there that where the gun is, that's the lighter that when you push that down, the flame will come up. Now, these were sold, and the actual selling date was 9/11. And it's now the hottest item in the Arab countries, and this was emailed to me, asking me, do we have any of these here in the United States? And I was absolutely appalled when I saw that this is what is happening in the Arab countries overseas, and especially in the countries that are considered our friends.
You were appalled at the merchandising.
At the merchandising.
At the merchandising,
yes.
but you're not shocked at what it depicts or the fact that it does show their disdain for the United States.
Quite right.
This is something that obviously, I'm assuming, in your opinion, will never be overcome.
I'm afraid not. It's not going to be overcome. If you go back into the history that what happened, say, in the Second World War, where you had Hitler had a whole generation of Germans that were anti anything that was other than Nazism, there has been a change. It's taken a whole generation to die out. But where the change starts is in the schools. So in other words, after the war in 1945, when the schools stopped disseminating the hatred for the West, the next generation grew up not hating the West. So what you have at the moment is you have Saudi Arabia with the madrasas. They spend billions of dollars in having these schools which preach and which teach the hatred of the infidel. They're not talking about the hatred of the Israeli or the hatred of the Jew. They're talking about the infidel. And the infidel is anyone that is not Islamic. So what you have is over the last couple of weeks and the last couple of months, you've had attacks on Christian churches. You take, for example, in Pakistan, last week, 7 people out of the group that were there, that were supposed to be a human rights group, what they did was, in order to check to find out who was not the Muslim, they made everybody stand up and give a verse of the Quran. The 7 people who were Christians who couldn't give this verse of the Quran, they were tied up, gagged, and shot. And that happened last week.
Can we, in the years since we first visited, have we, in your opinion, has the world, has the United States, has anybody made any headway in changing the world's minds or convincing the world that this is indeed something that we need to be pursuing?
Well, I think for the first time the United States realizes that we have an enemy that doesn't have a country, they don't have a uniform, and we don't have an army that we can fight against. In the past, whenever we've had to fight, whether it was the Cold War, we knew Russia was there, and as long as we had a certain amount of power and they had a certain amount of power, there was a stalemate. The problem that you have today is that that doesn't exist. What you have now is a group of people, and they've hijacked a wonderful religion. These extremists have taken this religion of Islam, they've hijacked it totally, and they've turned it into their version of Islam, and they're teaching it at the schools. So what that means is that we're going to be in a situation that, for example, the PLO, they are showing children of 2 and 3 years old walking around with bombs strapped around them and saying that when I grow up, I want to be a martyr. Now we have a problem over here if that is not stopped. What happens when those 2 or 3 year olds become 12 or 15 years? They get a visa, they come into the United States, they are now trained to be terrorists, they go to visit Disneyland.
Sure.
So instead of visiting Disneyland as a 12-year-old, they go to Disneyland to blow it up as a suicide bomber.
There's been lots of discussion as to how to approach this war on terrorism, and one of the theories that have come up is what we call the ticking bomb terrorists, and that's where we kind of fight fire with fire. Tell us a little bit about that.
Mike, I must tell you, this is the most amazing thing I've read about or seen. We have a law professor who is probably one of the most left and liberal of all law professors, who's brought up something which is completely different to anything that you would expect coming from this particular law professor. Alan Dershowitz at Harvard has come up with what's known as the ticking bomb terrorist. And when I was at the DMZ speaking to the officers between North and South Korea, talking to them about the fact that I believe that we have a problem in the fact that the military that we have today is ready to, and probably is the best fighting machine anywhere in the world. The military we have today hasn't got a clue how to handle this new war. So one of the things I brought up there when I was giving them a seminar was the ticking bomb theory, which Alan Dershowitz had brought up. And what he said was this: we do not have any laws that would permit us to torture anyone in order to save lives. It just doesn't exist here in the United States. So going back on that, you'll notice that the people that we capture that are potential Al-Qaeda people, like this man Bill Siba, who was captured 2 weeks ago, he has not been brought into the United States. He's somewhere where they can torture him. This is how we are getting the information from Al-Zudaiba.
Right.
We have him, and we have whoever was captured in Afghanistan or in Pakistan. Those people are sent either to Egypt, to Jordan, or to the Philippines, and now they're also using Yemen. Because there, what happens is that the Americans take custody, they give them over to somebody else, so they're not doing the torturing, but they're getting the information. So let me go back now to 9/10. You contacted me 9/12 when you called me in Japan.
Yes.
Let's assume on 9/10, we were able to get hold of Muhammad Atta, and he was sitting over there and he was laughing and saying, well, you know, we've got all sorts of things that are going to be happening in the next couple of days. If we caught him here in the United States, he would have got an attorney. We would have had to read him his rights. We would have had to do everything, and maybe 1 year down the road, he would have been brought to trial. In the meantime, 3,000 people were killed. So what Alan Dershowitz says is that we don't have a judge or we don't have a law where we could get a warrant because of the extremity of the problem, meaning that thousands of people can be killed. And if thousands of people can be killed, we should have the right to be able to use any means whatsoever. If it means torture, or call it any other name that you want.
Sure.
Extraction, anything
Coercion,
that you want.
right.
Coercion, anything that you want. But we've got to be able to get that information because the time bomb is ticking. It's now 9:10. 9/11 is going to happen tomorrow at 9 a.m. or 9:15 or whenever it's going to be. We don't have that.
A surprising theory coming from a person of Alan
Right.
Dershowitz's political leanings. You concur with him?
Totally, because let me go further. Let's assume over here, and I don't know if you have children or you've been seeing so much about these little girls disappearing. What happens if we have a situation over here where a serial killer is apprehended? And he's sitting there and he says, I want to speak to the parents of this little girl. And these parents are beside themselves. They don't know what to do. There's no way that they can find their child. So they beg this person, tell me, where's my daughter? Well, I can tell you, she has got 3 hours of oxygen. I've already been captured. I'm going to go probably to the electric chair. I've already killed 10 little girls. Why should I worry if I'm going to kill an 11th? So there's no way that you can get this person, especially if he turns around and says, she's got 3 hours of oxygen. Now, how can you get the laws of this country to allow somebody to coerce, as you said, the information out of this person in order to save that little girl? We don't have that.
But
so coming back to what Alan Dershowitz says, if it's extreme enough and if it can be proved that this is going to kill thousands of people or kill this little girl, unless we have the ability to be able to coerce this information out of that person, it's something that the judiciary should definitely look at, because we're at war.
And that brings up the point. I mean, that there are people who would argue to say that makes us no better than they are if, in
right.
fact, we...
Okay, so I'm no better than they are. The difference is, however, I've saved 3,000 people, right? I'm no better than they are, and I've saved that little girl.
I got one last question for you, then we got to go. As we're taping this program, the Congress is debating whether or not they're going to give the president the latitude to actually go to war with Iraq. Are we, in your opinion, are we escalating this more than it should be in virtue of what we're trying to accomplish?
Not in the slightest. This man has proved over the last 10 years that he's a killer. He's a killer of people. He's a killer of as you know, with the Kurds, he killed villages. There were 5,000 people gassed. He kills his own people. He has been the man, when he went to war, he invaded Iran. And when he went to war and invaded Iran, in that 8-year war, over 1.5 million Arabs were killed, or Islamists were killed. He's the greatest killer of Islam that there has been. Secondly, he's completely overt. His son, Uday, has a newspaper which is called The Economist. And the Sun has turned out, and in the op-ed, which came out 2 weeks ago, he has declared war on the United States, saying that suicide bombers should be sent into the United States. People that have the chemical and biological weapons will be sent into the United States. America is our enemy. In other words, they are completely overt about this. They are no longer covert. And our problem that I see with Iran and Iraq is not that you're going to have a problem of a nuclear bomb. I really don't believe that that is going to be our major problem. My major concern is if I go into one of the shopping malls that we have here in Rockford, and all of a sudden a suicide bomber decides to blow up that shopping mall, that is going to be a problem. If chemical weapons are going to be put into the air system within the shopping mall, everyone that's in the shopping mall is going to die, the same as the sarin gas people in Japan.
Sure.
That is where we've got our problem. And unless we preempt this, and unless we go in and get rid of it, we are not fighting the Iraqi people. We are fighting the dictatorship that controls the Iraqi people.
So we have to get rid of not the Iraqi people, we've got to get rid of the dictatorship that is the controlling factor that is manufacturing these weapons of mass destruction. That's our problem.
Michael, I wish we had more time. I appreciate you being here, and I know there's more questions to be asked, and I know there's probably people out there who'd like to ask some questions themselves, and we invite you to email us, because I know this is an evolving story as we're talking about the Iraqi situation, and obviously we're going to know more in the weeks ahead. If you have any questions for Michael Kahn, please feel free to email me those questions at news@wrex.com. And somewhere down the road in the next several months, I'll invite Michael back and we'll answer those questions and talk to him more in depth about the situation in the war.